Yes, where? I'm muting us, so.
Hello.
Oh, I missed that. No.
Oh, I can look.
Nope.
Oh,
You're
come on.
unmuted.
Oh, I can still look.
Nope.
Hello, I'm so sorry
No.
that it's late. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Nelson. How are you?
Yael. I thought of a story. As soon as we finished last time, I thought of a story I would like to share with you.
Please.
You may know it already, but not everybody has to know. It had to do about names, people's names. Remember we had
Yeah.
your son, what was his nickname before he wanted to be David?
Davidi.
Davivi. Okay, anyway, I heard the YouTube lecture by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and they were introducing him. The introducer said, and here is Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, or Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. So here's Rabbi Sachs. Sachs came in and said, well, people always have this problem. Am I Rabbi Lord or Lord Rabbi? In English, this happens, but in Hebrew, we don't have this problem. In Hebrew, the name comes first, and then comes the title, whatever the title may be. The title will change, but the name stays strong, like David HaMelech. So I thought it was such a great story. I thought, your little David should know that.
That is great. That's right. Shmuel Hanavi, David Hamelech.
Yeah, Eliyahu HaNavi.
Yeah.
Tamar, have you heard from your sister in Israel?
Pardon me?
Have you heard from your sister in Israel?
Yes, in fact, we happened to be on a Zoom call with her. We're four sisters, three of us live in the United States and one in Israel. So we have, twice a week, we have a Zoom call where all four of us talk to one another. On Monday morning, my sister suddenly said, what's that siren? I hear a siren. She says, oh, maybe it's for Yom Yerushalayim. But it kept going. So she ran into the other room to get the radio. And then her children started calling her. So we heard that's how we learned what was going on. That's when the first rockets were coming at Jerusalem. And they had to go into, people had to get into shelters. My sister has a reinforced room in her apartment. Many people have that.
Yes, my cousin has her bomb shelter there too.
Right. So she uses it for normal uses the rest of the time, and her computer happens to be in there. So we continued our Zoom conversation.
Good.
Wow, that's scary. Tamar, my mother is one of four sisters also, one of whom lives in Israel.
Oh my goodness.
That's a very funny coincidence.
Where in Israel do they live?
My aunt lives in Talpiot, and her son lives in Lod, actually, which has been very scary.
A lot of trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of, my mother said my aunt went to visit them and then went home, like during the day. It's safer during the day. I said, why didn't she take them with her? And they said, well, that's their home. They're, they feel nervous to leave it. I actually think is part of it at this moment. It's just sad. But I'm glad to hear that your sister is okay. Everyone is hanging in there.
Thank you.
Hello, Dan and Debbie. Wonderful. Well, I thought we could learn in the hopes of peace and safety for all of those that we love and care about in Israel. And this Shabbat is the 8th yard site for my father. And so I hope that we could learn in his memory as well. I'm speaking at Shul, and we'll be sharing some version of what we learned here tonight. So your insights might come with me all through Shabbat. I'm sure they will. Let me share the screen. It's hard for me to imagine that we are moving on to the fourth book of the Torah. It really felt like, just last week that we started together, and I think we started in Breshit even. No, I think we started in maybe Vayera. I think it was Vayera maybe. But in any event, very close to the beginning. And now we are starting Parsha Bamidbar and Sefer Bamidbar. Really amazing journey we've been on together, at least for me. Wonderful. So I wanted to think a little bit about the desert, the wilderness aspect of this week's Parsha, and also thinking about it as sort of the frame or the context for the rest of the Sefer for the next several weeks. This week's Parsha is about counting. We take a census of the people, and it's about how we arrange the Bnei Israel around the Ohel Moed as they travel through the desert. But right at the beginning of the Parsha, in the first pasuk, right away, we learn where they are. V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai, right? And the English translates it backwards, which is interesting, right? But it really means that God spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai, be'ohel moed, in the tent of meeting, be'achad l'chodesh hasheni b'shana hashemit, let's say tam me'eretz mitzrayim lemor, right? And that the time and the date. And I think that the placement of Bamidbar Sinai raises the question of many Mefarshim, because it's kind of like if I was talking on the phone and to my mom, and I said, Mom, I was talking to my sister in the living room. And unless there was something about being in the living room that felt sort of relevant to the conversation, like I saw someone pass by my front window, right? I think my mom would say what does it matter that you were in the living room, right? Why not just say I was talking to my sister? And so this extra layer of context around where God speaks to Moshe, right? We know that he speaks to Moshe in the Ohel Moed, but why is the Torah going out of its way to also tell us that they're in Midbar Sinai? So Bamidbar Rabbah suggests two possible metaphors that the wilderness of Sinai teaches us. And this also, right, we often read Bamidbar the Shabbat before Shavuot. And so this is a very nice midrash that connects Shavuot also to Bamidbar. So, right, they quote our pasuk and they say, Lama Bamidbar Sinai, right? Why does it tell us that they're in the wilderness of Sinai? Mikan shanu chachamim b'shlosha devarim nitna haTorah, ba'esh u'ba'mayim u'ba'midbar. Right, that the Torah was given through three things: Eish, fire; Mayim, water; and Midbar, the wilderness. And then they bring proof text for each one. That's what the ellipses is. The lama nitna b'shlosha dvarim halalu. Right, why are these the things that we say the Torah is given through? Elu ma elu chinam l'chol ba'ei ha'olam kol divrei Torah chinam hem. I think this is a beautiful idea. The wilderness is a metaphor for Torah, that just as the wilderness is sort of free and available to everyone, so too Torah is free and available to everyone. And I think that is a beautiful idea. I've also seen midrashim that say that, right, the Torah was given sort of out in public, so that anyone could say that they also heard and they also could have laid claim to the Torah, and that it wasn't a secret exclusive club of Bnei Israel and Hashem and the Torah. The Torah is free and out there for everyone who wants to come take it. And so why, when we embark on this Sefer, are we talking about the wilderness? To remind us that just as the wilderness is this free expanse, so too is the Torah. Another valence for thinking about this is to think about ourselves as the wilderness, right? And so then the second suggestion here is Davar Acher, second suggestion, V'yedaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar Sinai, Ela kol mi she'eno oseh atzmo kamidbar, hefker, eno yachol liknot et hachachma v'hatorah. That anyone who does not make themselves ownerless like the wilderness, cannot claim or acquire the wisdom and the Torah. So I think that's a hard concept to think about, what it means to make oneself ownerless. And the Sfat Emet was particularly taken by this midrash and that idea. And I don't know if he makes it clearer, but I think he gives us maybe one direction to go in. He suggests that, and I think we've talked about this before, that being hefker is about sort of taking yourself down a notch. Right, that the Torah represents shleimut, like a wholeness, and that if we look at ourselves as chaserim be'enai, as lacking in our own eyes, then we'll yearn for wholeness. So being hefker like the desert is sort of saying like we are not whole yet, we are not full. And that was the preparation of Bnei Israel before they received the Torah, is that they had arrived at this attribute of desertness, that it became clear to them that they needed to yearn for wholeness and to clarify this need for others. So I find the idea of like this complete humility, sort of like self-destructive almost humility, sometimes a little bit difficult to swallow. But I think that maybe if we think about being hefker as saying like, it's not our accomplishments. We can't claim the right to all of our achievements, all of our Torah knowledge, all of our wisdom, right? We have to credit God, our parents, our teachers, our friends, our community, right? People who have helped us along the way, that it's, we're hefker in the sense that we are not solely the owner of our own body and our own accomplishments. So those are the first two ideas. I don't know how they sit with people, right? Either that the Torah is sort of ownerless and available to all, or that we need to be ownerless as individuals. And maybe we'll do the third one, and then we'll pause, unless people can jump in if they would like. And this, I put this in here because I think it is so beautiful. In Nedarim, they do this thing, the rabbis often, where they pick a pasuk and then they play some word games with it to find what they want in the pasuk, right? So they take this pasuk from later on in Bamidbar, umi midbar matana, umi matana nachliel, umi nachlael bamot, right? It's a recounting of our journey. We went from the midbar to matana, from matana to nachliel, from nachliel to bamot, and those are places. But the rabbis want to read a lot into it. So Rava says, right, what does it mean that they went from the midbar to matana? Amar le kevan she'osa adam et atzmo kamidbar shehu mufkar l'chol haTorah nitna lo b'matana. Right, that when you make yourself as the midbar, the Torah becomes your matana. When you're able to take away all of maybe the pride, like strip the layers away, you can truly accept the Torah into your heart. And so then what does it mean to go from matana to nachliel? So the rabbis play off the word nachliel as a nachala, that once you have this gift, it becomes a bequeathment to you. And you can give it on to your own children, right? Once you take the Torah into yourself, it really becomes a part of you, something that you're able to give as freely as it was given to you, which I thought was beautiful. And so then the third way of thinking about the midbar as a metaphor is to think about this midrash tanchuma, where God, right? Sometimes I think we forget that there was an intention to coming into the midbar, right? God decided, we learned in Shemot, that there's like a long, I think we talked about this, right? The long, short way, that Bnei Israel needed that time in the desert to sort of process the experience of going from Mitzrayim, which is like narrow, right? A small place where we were compressed, to Eretz Yisrael, which is literally like Zava, right? Eretz Zavat Chalav, it's flowing with milk and honey. It's a big, expansive place. And the Midbar was like the place for everyone to go from being very confined to being very free and able to breathe deeply and expand. And here the Midrash adds another twist, right? That God thinks to God's self, if I take them the straight way, right? they will take a lot of possessions, machzikin ish b'sadeh u'b'kerem, the fields and the vineyards, umavtilin et haTorah, umatbilin et haTorah, min haTorah, that they'll neglect or forget the Torah. Ela ani molichin derech hamidbar. Rather, I, God, will take them through the midbar. V'yachlu et haman, right? They'll eat this sort of collective food of the man. V'yishtu mei be'er, and they'll drink the well water, which again is sort of a collective thing. V'haTorah mit yashevet begufan. And here it says that it will penetrate them, but literally the Torah will sit inside of them, right? Which sort of makes me think back to the Nachala, like that this gift of Torah gets inside of you. And Eric Fromm, who is I believe was Jewish, lived in Germany in the, good, someone else knows, can validate. He was a sociologist, a scholar, and he maybe learned this Midrash Tanchuma. He has a very similar thought. This is from Rabbi Sachs, really likes Eric Fromm, and he quotes him often in thinking about the desert. And he talks about how the desert is not a home. There are no cities, there's no property. It's the place of nomads who have that which they need. And all that they need is life's essentials, not belongings, right? Not the kerem and the sadeh, but just the man and the mayim, the be'er mayim. Life in the desert is preparation for a life of freedom, which really feels as though he is writing about Bnei Israel, right? That the life in the desert, why, right? Surely it was no accident that the generation that goes into the land of Israel is the one that was born in the desert, that only knew the desert. They didn't know Mitzrayim. So far, I think these are compelling and beautiful metaphors about the desert, right? That the desert is like the Torah, or like ourselves, or like the way our community should work. And I definitely welcome thoughts about if any of them resonate more or less with any of you.
Well, it makes me think it would be nice if there was, like in Israel, there was the place where people learn the language. Anyway.
Oh, when you first get to Israel,
yeah.
I'll think of it. Ulpan, no, but there's
the Ulpan. Yeah, an Ulpan is like a desert. A period you wait to accommodate. It would be nice if everybody I immigrated to the United States. I was just thrown in and I was there. I wish I had like a little period in the desert or in the open that I could learn what does it mean to be an American. So,
interesting. Right. This is where Bnei Israel learned what it meant to be Jews. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And also there's the aspect of universal in particular. The desert is everybody's or nobody's, but is like the global possession to a particular chosen people. So that happened, the choosing happened in the desert. But nobody else was present. Everybody else was present.
Yes, I have seen that idea in other places as well, Nelson. That right, that the outside influence is like a dangerous thing when you're building your identity, and so this was the perfect place to experiment without outside negative influence.
The holiday of Sukkot gives us a little taste of that experience by living in these flimsy huts. It recapitulates the desert experience, or at least a small part of it.
Yeah, and certainly, you feel that expansiveness and the narrowness on Sukkot, right? Like, at least my sukkah is not small. My husband built this crazy contraption, which is quite large, but you sort of feel like safe and cozy inside. And yet when you look up, you see the broadness of the sky. That is a beautiful transition to my next piece, which I think is that, of course, I think it makes sense that the rabbis talked about the Midbar as a metaphor. But yet at the same time, Bnei Israel actually spent 40 years, right, actually outside in the wilderness. And so maybe it's not just a metaphor, but it's a place that is conducive to finding God, finding oneself, finding community. And my father was someone who felt much happier and calmer and freer in the outside. He was an Eagle Scout when he was a child, and he would take each of his children on a solo camping trip, just, the two of us, every summer when we were old enough. And we went canoeing and kayaking. He always was like the first to volunteer to take groups of kids on hikes places. And he loved to daven outside. He really felt like it was like the place to connect to God. And he was not alone. And so I thought we could explore some sources about like what about the desert brings that connection out of us? Why do we sit outside in Sukkot, right? Why do we try to recreate that experience, although probably not often enough? And Dr. Erica Brown, who is a beautiful writer, actually wrote, I don't have it with me, but a plug, the Koren publishers have started to put out English commentaries on different Sfarim. It's not in order and they don't have all of them yet. The Book of Ruth, I think, is particularly beautiful. Yael Ziegler wrote that one. But Erica Brown just, I think maybe last year or 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, wrote the one for Bamidbar. And she wrote it based on a series of articles that she published in the Jewish Advocate, like as a blog. So I highly recommend the book. I don't own it, but I found this piece here, but I've used it before in other people's libraries. Dr. Brown notes that the word Bamidbar is often translated as desert. To the credit of Sefaria, which is the translation I use, they always translated it as wilderness, but certainly I grew up thinking of the Midbar as the desert. And Dr. Brown suggests that this translation does not capture the landscape of the biblical region in its entirety. Anyone who has traveled in the south of Israel knows that the region is better captured by the word wilderness. It is mountainous and cavernous, often struck by flash floods and hardly monochromatic in color. Images of nature created by our prophets confirm both the danger and the unsettling sensations of being in the wilderness. There is something about the expansiveness and simplicity of the environment that makes people contemplative and aware of their insignificance. And I think, right, you maybe hear an echo of the Sfat Emet there. The enormity of the terrain highlights our smallness, and often in the place of fear, religious awe arises. Wisdom too, like a spring or sudden flood, rises where least expected. But it is not only the spiritual rawness which is possible in the vastness of the wilderness that leads to knowledge. It is the desire to put order in the chaos which leads to the acquisition of Torah. Because humanity feels dominated by the landscape, do we try to overcome this impotence by building structures of human intelligence? So as someone who has hiked in Israel and also in America, I think I've seen friends who got to like the Grand Canyon, and I felt similarly about the pictures that they take as I do about the pictures that I've taken in southern Israel, which is that there is this sort of awe-inducing expansiveness and color and brightness to the landscape. I don't know who here has done hiking or camping in any of those places. Looks like maybe Debbie and Dan. In southern Israel, or in America?
This desert had a very desirable feature. You were taking a people who were totally immersed in a culture they wanted to erase and to start over again. This was a time to erase.
But that's why they all had to die in the desert too, right? I mean, there was the idea that it didn't really matter what happened. They couldn't change enough.
Yeah. And it is the group that grew up in this place that was both sort of dangerous and unsettling and also awe-inducing and inspiring, that was able to sort of climb out of the slavery mentality, right? It was their parents, right? Second generation survivors. We know that it's not like you're unaffected, but that somehow growing up here in the wilderness helped them move past it and move to a place where they were ready to go into the land of Israel, to forget, or maybe not forget, but like let the winds wash over it, right? Definitely. Definitely. And the more that I dug into that idea of wilderness, the more I found, and this is just a little taste of like a survey course of Jews in the desert. Evan Eisenberg, who wrote a book called The Wilderness in Israel, points out that from all of ancient Near Eastern literature, the Bible is one of the few texts that knows wilderness as a place of majesty, a place where God lets himself be known. Far from rejecting nature, the Hebrews embrace her as a whole, thorns and all. And Ellen Bernstein, who also writes a lot about wilderness and the Jews, notes that all of our ancestors at some point were called out into the wilderness. Abraham, Yaakov, Moshe, right? We're supposed to leave their homes, their lives, their communities, and to endure a period of uncertainty and unfamiliarity in the desert. And I think when I thought about this, I also thought of Eliyahu, right? When he's called and he sees all the like wonder of nature, and then the small, voice that's Mama Daka comes out, right? Also feels like it's in some cave in the middle of the mountains. That certainly there's like this, and Moshe does not stay in the camp to talk to God originally, but he has to go up onto Har Sinai, like a far journey, far away from the rest of the community, the people, the lights, the livestock, the noise, whatever there was in the camp, to be sort of alone, to be able to speak with God. And Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, I think, suggests maybe why that is, right? That in the wilderness, your possessions cannot surround you, your preconceptions cannot protect you, your logic cannot promise you the future. Your guilt can no longer place you safely in the past. You are left alone each day with an immediacy that astonishes, chastens, and exalts. You see the world as if for the first time. And I think that that's true for hikers, right? You bring what you can carry. You have to sort of be self-sufficient. Anything else might weigh you down. And that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel talks a lot about awe as connecting to finding the divine or God in the world. And so seeing the world with awe as if for the first time every day that you wake up in the, on your camping trip, certainly feels like maybe it's another connection to the divine, to the expansion. And so I think there is a tradition of thinking the Midbar is actually the Midbar, an actual physical place that inspired Bnei Israel to be able to grow up as a nation, to be ready to move into the land of Israel. And there was a image that I found, and I meant to properly cite it before I did. And it's very hard to see. I apologize. Let's see if we can make it a little bigger. It's a picture of one woman, and in on the left-hand side, one way to think about moving is I'm leaving, and there's this sort of like vast emptiness in front of her. Another way to think about it is I'm expanding. And I think that what we see throughout the rest of the Sefer, whatever we explore of the anxieties of Bnei Israel, right? Wishing that they could go back to Egypt where the food was certain, wishing that they weren't in the desert where it was hot and they were uncomfortable, is that Bnei Israel had to move from this mindset of I'm leaving and I don't know what's in front of me and I'm terrified, to I'm expanding, to I'm growing, I'm being and becoming someone new. And that when they could sort of cross over that arc in the Sefer, things start to get a little bit better. But the beginning is filled with the anxiety of the leave. And so I picked this also because I wanted to share life news of my own, which is that my family is moving this summer to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Which is closer to Chicago. So that's the good news. I can come visit you guys in person, only a 4-hour drive away. I perhaps am still very much in this mindset, I'll be totally honest, but I'm pushing myself to be in the expanding mindset. So the whole idea of moving feels very resonant for me. But I'm glad that I will have you guys as my constant through the end of this year, at least. My husband got a very good job and we were very proud of him in Ann Arbor. He'll be the head of school of the Ann Arbor Hebrew Day School, which is a K-5. But so I think that moving back to Bnei Israel and the Parsha, that the idea of the desert is the vehicle that moves Bnei Israel from I'm leaving to I'm expanding. And that's why it was so very important for them to be there, whether we think of it as a metaphor, or as an actual place, that it is the way that Bnei Israel moves from the narrowness of Mitzrayim to the expansiveness of Eretz Yisrael. It's only allergies. I know you can't catch anything from me, but I promise.
Yael.
It's like Henry David Thoreau on Walden Pond, right? You have to get away and just be by yourself in the wilderness, and only then can you learn about your true self.
Yes, yes. I grew up very close to there. My mother brought us there to try to be like quiet, like Henry David Thoreau. It made quite an impact on me.
It's a lovely place to swim.
Yes, yes, it's beautiful there. Walden's Pond.
You'll love Ann Arbor.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, my son got his PhD there. It is 5 hours from Chicago, no matter what you do.
Oh yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
I will admit it's one of the first things I looked up because I thought, oh, I could come all the time for Shabbat. Because as a Northeasterner, I think of everything as very close together. But I was surprised to learn it's longer. But 5 hours is still not a plane ride. So
It's a boring ride on Route 94. You know, you'll love the community.
I think so. We have high
Yes.
hopes.
Yael.
Yes.
It's been so interesting to hear these very positive connotations of the word desert and all these beautiful ideas that are that we heard and read about what the desert can do for you. And yet in the English language, desert is a very negative word. A neighborhood that does not have food stores is called a food desert.
Yes.
And in general, if a place lacks something that's important to us, we call it a desert. And here, of course, is an entirely different view of the desert and what it can do for people. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. I don't know if the word deserted comes from there as well, right? But that's like very much about being alone. You know, and the desert like can be quite dangerous. It's a place that can be scary, right? Certainly. I really liked the way that Erica Brown framed it as moving it from desert to wilderness. Because I think that at least in Israel, having not been to the deserts in the west part of this country, that there is something more, you know, I always pictured it like cowboys in the desert and tumbleweed blowing by, you know, but that there is something a little bit more vibrant. I was even saying to my husband last night that, you know, we sit in a monochromatic space all day in offices with white walls and very few windows. And so if anything, it's almost like the desert is more colorful and more vibrant than the more sterile places we enclose ourselves in today. Like we make more of a desert for ourselves here than they maybe were in there. But yes, I think you're right that I had never thought, I had always thought of the desert portion of Bnei Israel's journey as maybe not a punishment, but sort of like a failing of Bnei Israel, not being able to go into Eretz Yisrael, you know, not being ready to go the quick way, being too scared, needing more time, but that maybe the wilderness was cultivating them in a really beautiful, intentional way, and not like as an afterthought.
It would be fun to explore hills and mountains, which in the Chumash, in the Tanakh, there's the phrase "Esai Yael heharim," lift my eyes to the mountains, from whence my help will come, and the Har Sinai. And I wonder what other references there are to hills and mountains.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I also was thinking about the Tehillim, right, are filled with inspiring views of nature. And I remember, I think it was when I was in my year in Israel and we went hiking and I saw like the wind blow through the trees or plants on the mountain top. And I said to the person next to me, like, oh, it's like, you know, Rakdu Ke'elim, like you could sort of imagine, it does look like deer are jumping through the mountains. Like, I think, you know, David HaMelech or whoever we think wrote Tehillim, like it seems clear to me at that moment, like, oh, he experienced the nature of Israel. And that inspired his writing. So I think certainly there are lots of references to hills and mountains within Tehillim, but probably within Tanakh, the Torah too. You could look around. I'm trying to think of other mountains. We actually have a book called The Littlest Mountain, which is about Shavuot and Har Sinai. And they talk about the mountain that Noach's boat rests on. And of course, all the sort of, you know, Har Hayafeh and the pretty mountains that are not Har Sinai. But I think there was another mountain. I'll have to look for it.
That was beautiful, Yael. A tribute to your father. His
Thank you.
Shema Heaven Aliyah.
Thank you so much, Nelson. Yeah, I think it's true for a lot of people in this world that there's something about breathing, right? Whether it's ocean or lake, Great Lakes air, which I'll find soon enough, you know, or just even the air out in a park that feels freer or less restrictive. People talk about getting a breath of fresh air. But
There are
certainly
wonderful state parks all around Ann Arbor that you can go exploring into.
we've heard that has made us more excited to move there. We're outdoor people. I inherited it from my father.
And they have red squirrels.
Oh,
I
Fascinating.
think they're really weird, but they have them.
Very interesting. Wonderful. Did we lose Nelson? I think we lost him. Maybe if I stop the share, find him again. Nope. Well, I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. A Chag Sameach. I hope your Shabbat is lovely. And I look forward to hearing about it next Thursday. Shabbat Shalom.
Good night.
thank you, Yael. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.